Good afternoon, Littleton. Welcome to 01460 on the Go, the podcast for Littletonians by Littletonians. Today is August 28th, 2025, and I'm here with Jim Duggan, our town administrator, as always.
Hello, Littleton.
And I'm also here with Jonathan Bransfield. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Jonathan owns Bransfield Tree Company, and most folks in Littleton will know him as the new tenant at Nagog Hill Orchard. And just for a little background for our listeners, Nagog Hill Orchard has been owned by Littleton since the year 2000 when we bought it from the Morrison family. It's about 95 acres, give or take, and 49 of those acres are APR land.
Correct.
And that's the part that you're leasing, right? Plus the big barn.
Correct.
So can you talk to us about what you're doing with the orchard now?
Right. So the plan there is to primarily create a native tree nursery, container trees. So the issue that I found in the nursery business is that a lot of our trees now they're Franken trees, frankly, right? So you have a lot of grafted trees. You have trees that are a particular type of headstock grafted to a rootstock. They're first of all generally not native. You know, they're foreign trees, Eurasian trees a lot. Ones that can tolerate the abuses and difficulties of commercial production, right? So a lot of trees that our native ecosystem will want to have in the forest, hickories, oaks, sourwood, persimmon, right? These trees are not readily or widely available in their natural form from the nurseries. And one of the reasons for that is that they don't like being spaded. They don't like being dug out of the ground. They don't like having their roots cut, okay? So the ones that you do see in nurseries, they're really vigorous. They're really weedy trees, and they'll tolerate a lot of abuse. So anything that doesn't tolerate that just isn't really available. The other problem is that the nurseries have been selecting, growers have been selecting for the longest time for male trees only. So you don't want to have fruit being produced. People don't want fruit falling on their whether it be large seeds or berries or whatever. They don't want it on their lawn, on the sidewalk.
Oh, right? On their cars,
right?
Yeah.
So now we have this overabundance of pollen. So what we're doing is we're working with these new containers that sidestep a lot of the problems that the older, like just when you think about your regular plastic pot, right? It's just a flat plastic pot, right? Solid walls. And when a tree is grown in those, they tend to just kind of circle around. They get pot bound really quickly.
Yeah.
So this is a new innovative technology. It was developed in the UK. Where they really put a lot of effort and energy into their trees to produce trees in containers that don't have those circling root, pot-bound issues. So what I've been doing for the last few years is applying that technology to these native species that aren't readily available, and we're getting good results. So Nagog for me is an opportunity to expand that production dramatically. Right now, we're just kind of We got a late start this year. We didn't get on the property until about April.
Right.
It rained every 3 days in April.
It sure did.
So there was a lot that we couldn't do without making a mess out of the soil. So what's there now is a small corner behind the barn where we've moved in a couple thousand trees, set up irrigation. We're working on the well. We cleaned up a lot of trash. I mean, that was probably the number one labor job.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, there was a lot of trash.
You mentioned a couple thousand trees. So
Yeah.
how big is your typical tree that's back there now?
Right now, there are trees that are 10, 12 feet tall.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Okay.
And then there's a whole bunch of trees that are like 4 feet and under. I have about 7,000 trees on order to come this spring. And these are little whips. These are tiny guys. So, I really want to get them early before they get, abused. Right? So we're buying them small. Hopefully in time we'll have a greenhouse and we'll be able to propagate our own from seed.
Okay.
So seed that we can collect locally, right? So local phenotypes that we can then develop and sell out. So that's the goal is improved native trees, more available, larger sizes, with better growing technology.
So can you talk a little bit about why it's important to have native trees and,
Sure.
and what led you to,
Yeah.
focus on native trees?
Yeah, so folks who maybe were looking for a place to jump in, Doug Tallamy wrote a very influential book called Bringing Nature Home, where he spells out in lay terms why native, okay? And the takeaway is that birds, bees, all our native fauna, and our native ecosystems, they all co-evolved, right? And have the specific expectations for what kind of nutrients and alkaloids and chemicals are in the leaves they're eating, and what is in the caterpillar that the bird is eating, that the caterpillar was eating the leaf, right? So when we introduce trees, I was just reading a paper recently where folks were raising a lot of lepidoptera, a lot of caterpillars, and they would release them onto a bunch of different types of cherry trees. So the native black cherry, the choke cherry, and then they got into the Kwanzan cherry, introduced cherries, right? And what they found was that obviously the ones that were raised on the native tree, they had a maturation rate of like 90-something%. They got to their mature form and went through their life cycle complete. The ones that were growing up on the non-native trees, they were getting like sub 20% maturation.
Wow.
So even though these caterpillars, the eggs that they put there, they hatched, they started eating, they're feeding, they're growing, they're going through their life cycles, they didn't make it all the way to the end. Okay?
Interesting.
So even though you might see a native insect feeding on one of these trees, in a way, it's kind of a trap. It's like a dead end.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
that all the resources that parent, that adult went into to make those eggs, they lay it on the wrong tree that kind of looks like the right tree, and now that whole brood is going to fail.
Wow, and that much of a difference.
It's huge. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
big. So so what's happening now in the landscape industry, which I'm a part of, is that especially younger folks, they want their residential landscapes to be relevant, ecologically relevant. Okay, so they want to select for trees that they're gonna play a role, right? They're gonna contribute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a dearth of available material to do it with. Okay, so native plants, native trees. The plants are the foundation of an ecosystem, right? You put the plants in the ground, and everybody else comes along. Okay, so this is where I'm stepping in, is on that plant level.
Okay, I've learned more in 12 minutes than this is fascinating.
It really is. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned briefly that you had done some cleanup, invasives, I assume, and what about the apple trees? Are some of those moved out now as well?
Yeah, we cleared the field that's directly adjacent to the barn.
Okay.
Because that's where we have water right now.
Makes sense.
Okay, so all the other fields, there's no water. So and there are actually generous grants through the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources to do that work, but you have to be on site for a year before you can qualify, before you can apply.
Okay.
Right. So everything we've done so far has been directly adjacent to the barn, just because we have to be parsimonious with our resources and time at this stage. So in the barn, like I said, a lot of what we've done, we've trucked out a lot of trash.
Which is astonishing because we trucked out a lot of trash
trucked out
before
a
you
lot of
got
trash,
there.
and we haven't even gotten into the attic. That third floor of that barn is
Wow.
chock full. But the good news is a lot of cardboard, so we might end up using a lot of that cardboard as mulch.
Oh, okay.
It's because, one thing about that land in general is that it has, I would say it has cancer. Right? The amount of invasive plant material that has been growing up under those apple trees, where you can't mow, right? Anywhere you can mow, you can maintain as grass.
Right.
Wherever you can't effectively mow, you get bittersweet, buckthorn, multiflora rose, just every invasive plant you don't really want to deal with. And that property is just loaded. It's just all along the edges where they never did anything. And in between, under all the apple trees, it's just a storm of essentially land cancer, ecological cancer. It's just this unchecked, unstoppable. It's stoppable, but left to its own devices, it will just mob over everything on site. And that's what's happening to a lot of the apple trees at this point. They're getting capped over with bittersweet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that Now I've lost my train of thought. Jim, save me. You got that? You got anything?
Sure. Let's go back to the grant. So you'd be here for a year, and then you'd be eligible to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of things would you want to earmark that money for?
So there's grants for reclaiming fallow fields. So I
Okay.
would hope to get some of that for the effort that we're going to put into clearing out a lot of the apple trees are going to go. They're not all going, but a great majority of them should go. Anybody wants can drive by and see what poor state they're in,
Sure.
right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there's money for that. And then the other set of grants is basically anything that doesn't have wheels. So a greenhouse, a shed, a potting shed, a well, maybe some, there's some electrical service. Maybe we'll find out the details as we get closer into it.
Okay.
But yeah, infrastructure for the work, but not materials, right? Not the pots or the soil.
Sure.
Or the potting soil.
How about the irrigation?
Irrigation? They'll help with that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So the soil and the pots, what is the relationship between the pots and what they're going to be growing in and the soil that's at the orchard now?
The soil that's at the orchard is staying exactly where it is. I don't want to disturb that soil. I don't want to export that soil. In my world, that soil is sacred, and it just stays where it is. It's also very rocky soil. It's extremely rocky soil. So the growing trees in containers, you need a specialized, very high drainage material.
Okay.
You can't have like a heavy clay, sandy soil, loam, right? So this is like your typical potting soil that you might encounter at a plant sale, at a garden center. Okay, so it's all going to be at this point all imported, right? Just buying it in tractor trailers from soil producers, and we will use that.
Can you talk a little bit about your preparations? The weather's starting to get cooler, so what are your preparations now that fall is on its way?
Yeah. So this winter will be a big push for land clearing.
Okay.
Okay, because what we encountered in the spring was wet, muddy soil, and we need to take advantage of machinery. We're not gonna Paul Bunyan that site. We have. This is one of my advantages of being, a tree company owner is that I have.
You've got the stuff,
We've got
yeah.
the machines, right? But they're heavy. It's heavy equipment, and so it's ideally the ground is frozen. When you want to bring that in. In some places right now, it's been so dry for so long, the ground is pretty hard. So there's a temptation there. But ideally, we'll wait for the winter for the ground to be frozen solid, so then we can move over it without issue. One thing we've encountered that's a challenge there is that the previous operator, he wrapped layers and layers of chicken wire around the stem of the trees to keep the rodents from chewing the stems. So that's just wreaking havoc on the stump grinders. And you can't chainsaw it either, so it's another.
So what, are you just going in like manually with clippers or?
No, we're grinding through it with the stump grinder, but we're just having to replace the teeth at an accelerated clip, which they're not cheap, but so be it.
I feel like every new tenant in an apartment or house encounters, the equivalent of chicken wire around the stumps.
The cob job of the previous
Yeah.
inhabitants.
Right.
Well, I'll say this. One thing I have encountered about that property and being in that barn is there's a room in the barn where they kept all the pesticides.
Okay.
Right. And to this day, you open that door and you're just wailed with the smell of organophosphates. Right? So, there's a legacy there of how the property was used. And it's also, it's just a truth about producing apples, right? That they just require a lot of pesticidal inputs, right? A friend of mine just discovered the first spotted lanternfly in Wayland day before yesterday. And spotted lanternfly, they love malice, they love apple trees, So that's going to be yet another layer of pests that have to be managed to produce apples in New England.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think the volume and the harshness of the pesticide regime, on that property in the prior administration was pretty severe.
To keep that many apples.
Yeah, and to do it cheaply, right? So that's the other problem is that
Right.
7 is dirt cheap. You can buy it, by the truckload, right?
Yeah.
And it kills everything. Right?
Okay.
So you just spray your 7 and you've sterilized the entire, land mass. So that is still there. You can still smell it.
So I think a lot of people would infer this, but what is your relationship to pesticides and your management of the nursery going forward?
So I stated at the town meeting that we had early on in this process that I've been in the tree business for 24 years, and I actually grew up in the greenhouse business starting at age 8. Right, my grandfather's greenhouse, and I remember when they would bomb the greenhouse and close all the doors and all the windows and just set off these pressurized canisters of, again, organophosphates, and just sterilize the whole place. And then they'd open the doors and then release their children into the greenhouse
Back in, kids.
to bring the petunias out to the front, So I'm a little sick and tired of it, to say the least.
Fair.
And so that's a lot of this is going to come down to species selection. There's only so much area on the land where we will need to or can put the containerized trees.
Okay.
And the remainder of the property is going to be food forest, right? So, and that's mainly going to be hybrid chestnuts, persimmon, pawpaw, and red mulberry. Okay, so these are all food-producing trees that require barely any pesticidal inputs. And I'm not planting it to be a moneymaker. I'm planting it to hold the ground, right, to have a space where people can gather, and maybe there'll be a good year for pawpaw and a bad year for persimmon, or a good year for this and a bad year for that. But I don't intend to spray them with anything, right? And they don't require it. They're different fruits. They're not maybe as luxurious as a giant apple. They're a little different. They have an acquired taste, right? But they're native to this land, right? These are trees that produced food that the original inhabitants would have known very well. Pawpaw, for instance, would not have survived. So after the megafaunal extinction 12,000 years ago, right, this was a fruit that required a giant ground sloth or a mammoth to eat it, pass it through its gut, and then the seeds would germinate after that process. Right? So once those animals were gone, these plants no longer had a way to reseed, right? So they could only exist in their extant groves. But yet we find them spread out all through their possible range. And the only explanation is the Anthropocene, the people would be the ones, the native inhabitants would have kept them going, kept propagating them, kept transplanting them, gathering seeds, figuring out how to germinate those seeds without that original megafaunal process.
Interesting.
Okay. Same thing with persimmon. That plant should be everywhere. This is another point to the native question. New England was cleared, essentially just completely denuded of trees. Okay, for agriculture. So last century there was a flip from 10% forest, 90% field, to now we're 90% forest, 10% field, with a lot of houses mixed in, right? So what we have now for a forest are all of the type of pioneer trees that have a reproductive ability to come back from that deforestation.
Okay,
A lot
sure.
of white pines, a lot of poplar, a lot of birch, a lot of oaks, and a lot of maples. Right? But all these other plants, sourwood, the persimmon, right? Scarlet oak you don't find around. Tupelo. There's a magnificent tupelo in the wall at the orchard, which people come on October 18th to the open house, and we're going to have a guide, because there are some really special trees on that property, from way back, right, that we've found, and we've started clearing out the invasives around them. But all of these other lesser trees, we think of them as lesser trees, they're not represented in our forest to the degree that they would have been prior to the clearing. okay?
Because
They don't reseed as readily, right? Oak trees are very attractive to squirrels. They gather the acorns, they plant the acorns, you get a lot of oaks, right?
makes sense.
Birch tree, birch seeds will germinate on a pile of rocks. Like they're really good. They're pioneers. Same thing with poplar, right? But a lot of these other trees, they don't do that. So now they're not represented, but they should be, right? So these trees that I'm focusing on, both in the production in the containers and in the food forest, are trees that should be there but are not.
Can we go back a minute? For a few minutes ago, you talk about the root system in the pots and how they just go, and you say the new innovative system from the UK.
Yeah.
What happens with the root system now?
Yeah, good question. So they have and when you want to come by on October 18th, we'll have all this demonstrated.
Okay.
But all it simply is these little finger-like protrusions all along the exterior of the pot with a hole on the end. So when the feeder roots go exploring out, they get guided down that little hole out to the opening. And as soon as the root pokes through that opening, it terminates. The air dries it out, and it just quits. And when that happens in a tree, it forces the root to fork and branch back up inside. So you get this process where they grow out, they terminate, they fork, those grow out, they terminate, they fork. So the root system in the pot is all this completely fibrous,
like a net, sort of?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. There are no big, thick, like woody, big roots.
Okay.
Which when you cut those, if you grow them in the field and then you sever those big roots, those trees languish. They suffer for years.
Yeah.
I've been saying it. I've been noticing a lot. When I first got into this business 30 years ago, you could feel pretty well 95% certain that a tree that you purchased from a nursery and planted, as long as you kept it watered, was going to survive. That is just no longer the case. We plant a whole row of trees, and one or two of them, even though they got the same location, same water, they just stroke out, right?
Wow.
And that just has a lot to do with the pressure of the industry, right? To blast these trees out, cut them, the root balls as small as possible. They all get trucked up from the mid-Atlantic or from the Pacific Northwest. So they're sitting on tractor trailers without water for days and days and days, right? And then they get to a wholesaler, they throw them out in the sun. So the stresses are just cumulative on these plants.
Interesting.
So these container trees will not have that.
That's interesting. Now, do I recall you mentioning hedgerows at one point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about? I think this is a really interesting
Thank you.
topic.
Hedgerows and coppicing, right? So, because the hedgerows in Britain, a lot of them are essentially coppiced or pollarded. Pleached is another word they used. Woody plants, deciduous woody plants, are actually, once they're established, can take a lot of aggressive manipulation of their headstock. Okay, we tend to think of these trees as being these very delicate, fragile systems, and as soon as you over prune it, it's going to die. And if you prune a tree at the wrong time of year, you can definitely kill it. But if done in the right window, you can aggressively change the shape of the crown of the tree and go from being a large scaffolded tree to basically a multi-stem shrub. Okay, so we all see this by the roadside, right, where they'll just go along and cut down all the trees, and then you drive by a year later, you see all these big stump sprouts coming out of the ground, right?
For sure.
So it's essentially doing that, but in rows, and those hedgerows, and you can plant a whole variety of different things and do that to them, and you end up with a dense thicket of diverse plant material that harbors a lot of wildlife, but in a very tight, contained space. So, we do a lot of work in Newton, where the developers now they tear down an old house and then they build a very large new house, and it goes all the way out to the setbacks in all directions. And then the Conservation Commission or the tree warden says, you got to put trees back that you cut down. So I've been percolating with this idea for a while that, situations like that, well, maybe if they only have 15 feet of space between the edge of their house and the property line, or 20 feet, whatever the setback is, you have a really dense hedgerow, right, of native trees, right, that have ecological relevance, provide the screening, okay, that people want to have.
Folks would want,
right?
for sure.
But instead of it just being a row of, arborvitae from Oregon,
Right.
It could be a row of plants, a diverse row of plants that you can pretty much do what you want with. Like every couple of years, you can just whack it, mow it, just drill it down to where you want to, just reset it to where it needs to be. It doesn't have to be this very fancy affair. It's just a wall of life, right?
And in the meantime, birds,
In the meantime, birds and bees and everybody's making a living.
chipmunks and stuff too, or
Sure. Whoever needs protection from predators. Right?
interesting. You mentioned a couple times October 18th. Can you tell us what's happening October 18th?
Yeah, we're going to have an open house. I think we'll throw the doors open at noon. Probably won't really get cooking until 3. There'll be music. There'll be some food. We'll have tours. Maybe some friends will create some art, some installations, something to look at. But we'll certainly have trees to look at, and we'll have a demonstration of how we're growing, what we're growing, why we're growing. And even though we don't have the full complement of plants that we intend to produce, we'll have poster boards for everyone to see the whole menu that we're hoping to achieve in the next couple of years. And as well as the plans for the other parts of the land that I mentioned where we're not necessarily going to do pot production. We want that land to be a community space. We want it to be a space where people can gather and turn off their phones, right?
No.
So this is the beginning of that. This is the beginning of starting a. I think Littleton is an interesting town. I've come across a lot of very interesting, fascinating people.
Yeah.
A lot of people that think alternatively, right? Healers and meditators and all the like. And these are my people. And so I think that Nagog can be a place where folks like that can gather and contemplate the future.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for coming today.
thanks
Really
for having us.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And thanks very much, Littleton, for listening. And we'll be back in a couple weeks.